Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out the range with a Maxim Defense PDX. This was built for a special operations solicitation, and it is basically a take on the AR-15 M16. You'll notice obviously that it's basically an AR-15 M16 in its upper and lower. It has a different buffering system back here, which we'll talk about, and then it has its own uniqueness going on out here on the muzzle end. So we'll kind of go through those bits and pieces here as we get into the video. But first, we just wanted to start off and tell you why this video came about. So when Copper got this gun in, we wanted to see how 7.62x39 stacked up against 300 Blackout. How many videos have you watched, including some of our own, where I've said 300 Blackout is basically a ballistically very comparable to 7.62x39. Well, now we have an actual chance to put that to the test. This gun, like the Sig Rattler, has a 5.5-inch barrel. So, and price-wise, they're about the same. These things retail for right around $2,000. If you can find a Rattler right now because of the panic buying for COVID-19, they're going to be within $100, $200 of each other. Both very high-priced firearms. But how does the 7.62x39 stack up, both in supersonic and subsonic loads? And this firearm, thanks to Copper Custom loaning it to us, is going to give us that opportunity to see how similar or dissimilar they are. And then we'll go over the features of the PDX and talk about some of the stuff that makes it kind of unique and a different alternative if you're looking for something that's not your average run-of-the-mill AR-15 by any stretch. The SCW stock is mirrored here with the brace, which was a Maxim Defense design. You'll notice that the buffer tube is much shorter, and we'll show you what the insides of the pistol look like when we get to that part of the video. But right now we're going to start off shooting 20 rounds. It comes with supposedly 2 of these. We only found 1 in the box with this one, but it comes with two 20-round magazines that hold the 7.62x39 cartridges. We also noticed that this gun favors the Barnaul ammunition versus the Tula. The Tula accuracy was abysmal. With that ammunition, with the Barnaul, it's actually on par with the 300 Blackout, the Rattler, in terms of accuracy. So let's go ahead and charge this bad boy up. We have a Trijicon MRO sitting on top, and let's do a little bit of shooting at 100 meters. Walk it out to 150. The recoil impulse on this thing is very much similar to my 300 Blackout Rattler. And yeah, as you can see, shooting up to 150 meters with this thing, and it's doing pretty good. So let's take a closer look at this Maxim Defense PDX and give you some of our thoughts on this interesting firearm and see how it compares to the 300 Blackout. So let's take the PDX apart and check it out and see what it looks like on the inside. And first, before we do that, we're going to kind of start from the rear of the weapon and work our way up to the muzzle. So back here, we have the SCW, what would be a stock system. However, this is a brace because it's a pistol, but it looks identical. This will be aluminum back here. And this is something that Maxim Defense, I believe, patented. And what it accomplishes is allowing a full-size bolt and carrier to travel back, far enough to extract and eject a round, pick up a fresh round, and go forward without having a carbine length, at least a carbine length extension tube on the rear of the receiver. And we'll show you how it accomplishes that here in a moment. So aside from this position, it has 4 additional positions that you can extend the brace. You push the button here. There's the first position. It locks into that position. Second, third, and then fourth fully extended. It's based on 2 you can't call them wires, but 2 rods, and it's fairly stable. It's not wobbly whatsoever like an underfolding AK. Moving forward, we have a Radian Systems, we do have an empty mag in there, have a Radian Systems ambi charging handle. We have an abbreviated selector lever on the right-hand side, and then a standard size selector lever over here. Now, even though it has a 3rd position, this one, unfortunately, only goes to semi-automatic. So you have safe, semi, and then what would be full. The pistol grip is actually smaller than your standard AR-15 pistol grip, but yet it's big enough for me to get my big hands all the way onto the pistol grip, and comfortably so. Has an ALG trigger in it, still maintains the forward assist. Some people love it, other people hate it. I could do without it, like my Sig Rattler doesn't have a forward assist, and honestly, I don't miss it. Have a port buffer up here. You'll also notice that the pick rail on top here kind of goes up, whereas typically it sets a little bit lower on a standard M4 style carbine. But it is a standard pick rail, and there is a connecting point right here where the joint is for the hand guard. Now it's so stable that it's almost what you might be able to consider monolithic. I mean, it's a very, very stable connection between the hand guard and the upper receiver of this pistol. Uses a standard AR-15 M16 style port cover. Has its own kind of design down here with the fencing around the magazine release. Push the button, drops the magazine. On the other side, we have a standard AR-15 style bolt release, but you'll notice that the texturing is a bit different on it. And then here's your ambi magazine release. To lock the bolt open, you'll notice that the bolt release, or the bolt, that bolt release is pretty much the same height as the magazine release. So when you're pushing that down, trying to get it, it's kind of inhibiting my ability to push that down to manually lock the bolt open, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So you really have to try. That's just one of those ergonomic things that doesn't seem quite finished to me, but it's still, you're able to do that and lock the bolt open. It doesn't keep you from doing it, it just makes it a little less easy to do. And then you have kind of a unique cut to the mag well here. You have a solid trigger guard that kind of drops down so it's big enough for gloved firing versus the shift down, or you push a little pin and swing down the trigger guard on a standard M4 rifle or M16. Up front, we have kind of an HK style mounting system here of the hand guard, and it has just a cross pin that goes all the way across and tightens down, and this clamps directly to the nut that's holding the barrel in the upper receiver. On top, we also have 2 QD mounting points on the other side, and then we have 2 M-LOK slots all the way around the hand guard. Comes with the hand stop in place, and then on the very end we have what is called the hate brake. And this thing actually does a couple of things, I believe. First of all, it helps direct that blast of the 7.62x39 out of such a short barrel, direct that blast concussion away from the user. And you'll notice in broad daylight like today, you get a huge fireball. When you're firing this thing and you're shooting in broad daylight, you'll see a fireball that is absolutely enormous when you're sitting behind the pistol. It's pretty entertaining, but it not only directs that blast away, and the flash, it doesn't do anything to subdue the flash, it just pushes that blast away from the shooter, but it also provides for, I believe, additional back pressure to the system, because this is not a piston-driven AR-15. This is a direct gas impingement firearm. The gas port is right about where my index finger is. So you can see it's a very, very short DI system. And you'll hear some engineers say that such short DI systems aren't known for their reliability, so a lot of people that make such short PDWs out of AR-15s will use a piston system, like the Sig Rattler. It has a very short distance from the chamber to where it taps gas off to cycle it, but it's actually a gas piston gun, and this is still direct gas impingement. So let's go ahead and break it open and take a look inside. First, we'll make sure that the weapon's clear, and it is. It takes apart just like a standard AR-15 with one exception. It's not going to hinge open when you take that first pin out. Typically, when you pop this pin, the AR-15 will hinge open. You'll notice it's not doing that. When you take it apart, you kind of have to hold the upper and lower together, pull that last front pin out, and then let the spring kind of push, kind of lift up and away, and you'll see the buffering system come out of the gun. This is your buffer. Here's your spring, and it is marked as an H3 buffer. So it's not captive like on a standard M4 or M16. I'm going to pull my charging handle to the rear, and you're going to see that it looks like a standard bolt carrier, but it's actually a little bit shorter. So they did have to shorten it, but that's because this sets in the rear like that. But you still have the same length upper. It's a standard length upper, but this is how they got it to work with that truncated extension, receiver extension or buffer tube. From there, it's just standard DI stuff, standard bolt and gas key. Everything else is pretty much standard AR-15 fare, including the charging handle. So yeah, that's a really interesting system, how it's set up. If you look inside, just a standard AR-15 lower. Again, it has an ALG trigger in it. Putting it back together is interesting. Put your T-handle in, take your bolt carrier, drop that in, push it forward, take your buffer, stick it in there, put your spring in, push back, and then lock it together. So while it looks a little bit awkward, it's actually fairly easy to do. So the whole point of this exercise was basically to find out if we could use 7.62x39 in a short PDW package and get the same performance or better performance than a similar 300 Blackout firearm. So that's why we're comparing the Maxim to the Sig Rattler. The cost on 7.62x39 is substantially less than 300 Blackout. Now 300 Blackout has come down in price, but it still isn't as affordable as 7.62x39. You can also now get this Brown Bear subsonic ammunition in 7.62x39, and it has a 196 grain projectile. So we went to the chronograph to figure out what we would get in terms of ballistic performance out of the supersonic and subsonic loads of comparable bullet weight. So using our lab radar in 300 Blackout, we found that a 125 grain bullet would do right around 1,740 feet per second. We found out on the 7.62x39 with a 124 grain bullet, so there's 1 grain difference there, we had about a 1,720 foot per second velocity. So we're talking 20 foot per second difference between the two, and that's within typical deviation of any commercially loaded ammunition. 20 foot per second isn't that big of a deal. So in terms of comparable bullet weights, we're seeing the same velocity out of the same 5.5 inch barrel. Good news. So let's take a look at the subsonics. For the 300 Blackout, we did 220 grain subsonics, and that's because I just don't have any 200 grain subsonics here. But so we had a 200 grain subsonic load, and it was doing right around 850 feet per second. Doing the 196 grain round out of the Maxim Defense gun, we had a subsonic velocity of 870 feet per second. So again, the velocity difference is minimal, even though the 300 Blackout shooting a heavier grain. It's shooting a 220 grain bullet versus a 196 grain bullet, but the velocities are very comparable. So all things being considered, this really does look like a much more affordable gun to shoot than the 300 Blackout. But there's downsides to using 7.62x39, especially in this particular firearm. The reason we don't have this suppressed is because on the Maxim website, it says if you suppress this firearm, you will void your warranty. Great big bold letters. They don't want you suppressing it. Don't know why, but they say don't do it. If you do, again, the warranty is voided. That's why we don't have a suppressor on here, because this is Copper's gun and most likely will be sold anyway. So we're not going to void the warranty for its new owner. Otherwise, we would do a comparison. And we'd also then put it on the sound meter and find out how it compares sound-wise. But yeah, that's why it's unsuppressed. Now, when we're talking about running these things without cans in place, we took some slow motion photography of us shooting supersonic loads, and there is a very pronounced and broad daylight muzzle flash with the 7.62x39. Big, huge fireball, and it's distracting when you're firing it. Now, using a 125 grain supersonic load out of my Rattler, we took the suppressor off, and all we see is smoke coming out of the barrel. There's no flash that's visible to me as the shooter, and on slow motion video, as you'll see, there's really nothing other than smoke coming out of the end of the barrel. There's no fireball in broad daylight. So that is one of the downsides to actually using 7.62x39. Because with the subsonic loads, which we have some loaded here, without a suppressor in place, the gun will not cycle. That one felt weird. So, as you can see, the gun won't cycle. Now, if we were able to put a suppressor on it, the back pressure would go up, assuming we weren't using a no back pressure silencer like I'm using on my Sig Rattler. I don't want the back pressure, because with that back pressure comes gas in your face. But if we could put a suppressor on here, it would probably give us enough back pressure to cause the gun to cycle, but we can't test it, again, because we don't want to void the warranty on the gun. But once you do put a regular baffled can on here, because an OSS would not work on this gun, once you put a baffled can on here, you're going to run into the same problems you're going to run into with any AR-15 using a conventional baffled suppressor, and that's gas coming through the action back down the barrel and just gassing the shooter out. So that's the other downside to using a standard AR-15 system like this that requires a baffled suppressor versus a flow-through design like the OSS. In the last segment, I forgot to show you that the Sig Rattler will actually cycle subsonic loads without the can in place. So I've taken my OSS suppressor off. I've loaded 5 rounds of 220 grade subsonics in there. Now this is an adjustable gas system. I have it set over to give it the most gas as possible, and I do that because I want the gun to run reliably either with supersonics or subsonics. I don't want to stop and switch my gas settings, so I have it set on the high setting anyway. So you can see the gun cycles just fine without the suppressor in place running the subsonics. When we first started shooting the PDX, we were using Tula ammunition, and we were getting groups that were measured in feet versus inches. We were thinking, oh my gosh, this thing is horrible. There's something about 7.62x39 and 5.5-inch barrels that isn't going to work. Fortunately, we brought some different ammunition out, so we had some 123 grain Barnul, and the group settled down to a little over 3 MOA at 50 yards, which is acceptable for a firearm of this size and for its purpose. So that's not that big of a deal. But when you're dealing with AR-15s and 7.62x39, there's 2 other factors that you need to take into consideration. First of all, the bolt head. Since it's a standard AR-15 upper, carrier, and bolt head size, the head on the case of the 7.62x39 is bigger than 300 Blackout or 5.56. Therefore, they have to take more material out of the bolt head, and that makes the walls around the head pretty thin. And other firearms, I haven't heard or seen that happen with this gun or heard of other PDXs having the problem, but I have seen other 7.62x39 conversions have their bolt heads crack right there where the locking lugs are on the bolt because it's so thin. So that's a factor with this as well, potentially. Next is the magazines. There aren't very many magazines out there I would consider to be of good quality and reliable for 7.62x39 using a standard AR-15 lower. Things like the old CMMG 7.62x39 Mutant that I had, it used AK magazines and it fed just fine. It also had an enlarged bolt head. It used more or less a 308 sized bolt head, and it used AK magazines. This you're forced to use, in this case, this is a C Products magazine, and you may run into feeding issues. When we first started shooting the gun, it would just override rounds in the magazine. We stopped, took it apart, oiled it, cleaned it up, checked it again, and now it seems to be working okay. But I do not trust any manufacturer's AR-15 mags for 7.62x39. So it's something else you're going to have to take into consideration if you want this particular firearm in this caliber. They're also available in 300 Blackout and 5.56. I know this is going to cause the phone lines at Copper Custom to blow up, but the gun used to produce this video, I'll take a picture of the serial number here and show it to you guys. This gun will be available for sale at Copper Custom. So maybe one of you guys will be able to pick it up. So in closing, I find that the PDX is an interesting firearm for sure. I don't know that I'd personally want to buy one over a Rattler. I prefer my Rattler, to be honest with you. And with regards to the 7.62x39, it's neat conceptually to be able to use affordable ammunition out of a gun like this. But when it boils right down to it, the lack of what I would consider to be reliable magazines and the fact that I can't suppress this particular firearm without voiding my warranty, it just isn't that interesting to me. So I think the gun is quality. I think that the brace system that this gun uses is certainly interesting. And the rifle version, the stock, would be pretty cool. Again, you can buy this system for your own AR-15, but in general, it's a well-made gun. It seems to cycle just fine. Steel-cased ammunition runs the gun just fine. Accuracy depends on the ammunition, and we're not going to fire a whole bunch of ammunition because it's in such short supply right now because of the COVID-19 thing going on. But in our testing, as it got later in the afternoon when the gun was getting hot, it seemed like the groups were opening up and the thing became less accurate. Reliability stayed there. So do I think it's worth it? Worth is a subjective thing. And at $2,000, it's a significant investment. If I were going to pick one of these up, although the 7.62x39 is pretty enticing, I would definitely go with 300 Blackout. But on top of that, I probably wouldn't go with one of these. I'd still go with the Sig Rattler. All right, guys, we'd like to thank you for 12 years of support. If you would like to support us here on the Military Arms channel, the best way to do that is to become a Patreon supporter. You can do that by following a link in the description below. Give that link a click, check out some of the perks, and consider becoming part of our Patreon family. Right underneath the video player, there's a join button. Click that join button and check out some of the perks and consider becoming part of our YouTube membership family right here on YouTube. And last but not least, swing by and check out Copper Custom, who were kind enough to loan us this firearm for this video. And I wish I could link to it, but that's against YouTube policies. Again, thanks for 12 years of support, guys. We'll talk to you all soon.